This is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography and best hits. During this suburb, we're going to talk about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. So Brad Mehldau never stays in one lane for long. Just when you think you've got him figured out, he pivots, quietly, intelligently, and with total conviction. So this stretch of albums shows Mehldau breaking the frame without ever losing himself. So we start with Largo in 2002, and yes, this one shook the room. Produced by John Bryan, you get drum loops, electric textures, rock grooves. But this isn't a crossover move, it's a rethink. Rhythm becomes a landscape, not a grid. And suddenly, jazz sounds like it belongs right now. And then comes The Day Is Done, the emotional exhale. Intimate, tender, deeply human. Live in Tokyo strips it all back to solo piano. No safety net, just touch, time, and silence. And finally, Blues and Ballads, pure understatement, space doing the heavy lifting. So these records prove that progress doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it moves inward, and that's where Mehldau finds the magic. You're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography and best hits. During this suburb, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. So the kind of turn that defines an artist not by consistency of sound but by consistency of purpose. Because if there's one thing Brad Mehldau has never been interested in, it's staying in a single emotional or stylistic lane. Just when you think you understand him, he pivots, quietly, thoughtfully, and with total conviction. So this chapter of his career is what I like to think of as the moment Mehldau breaks the frame by asking a deep question. What else can this music be? The albums that we're focusing on right now, Largo, The Day Is Done, Live in Tokyo, and Blues and Ballads capture that questioning in real time. So let's start in 2002 with Largo. When this album arrived, it landed like a question mark in the middle of the jazz world. Produced by John Bryan, known more for his work in pop and film than jazz, Largo featured drum loops, electric textures, and rock-influenced grooves, elements that at the time felt almost taboo in serious jazz circles. Mehldau treats rhythm here not as a strict grid but as a landscape. The grooves don't trap him, they give him resistance, something to lean against, to question, to stretch. So this was an album that surprises people who didn't know jazz could sound this modern, this porous, this alive. But what's important is what comes next. After that bold, outward-facing experiment, The Day Is Done, released in 2005, feels like an emotional exhale. If Largo is about expansion, this album is about intimacy. It's one of Mehldau's most human records, maybe his most vulnerable. The focus returns to lyricism, to songs that feel lived in, reflective, and quietly devastating. Here, Mehldau's interpretation of contemporary material don't feel ironic or academic. They feel sincere. He plays like he's searching for meaning inside the song itself, turning each piece over gently, patiently. There's a tenderness that resonates deeply, especially late at night. So this album reminds us that complexity doesn't require density. Sometimes it lives in restraint. Then we move even further inward with Live in Tokyo, recorded in 2004. Solo piano, no safety net, no rhythm section to lean on, just Mehldau, piano, and time itself. What you hear on this record is clarity, of touch, of thought, of emotional intent. Mehldau's control of time here is extraordinary. He stretches phrases until they almost dissolve, then pulls them back into focus with a single decisive gesture. Silence becomes structural, pauses matter as much as notes. So this album is about presence, about being fully inside the moment. Live in Tokyo is powerful because it slows everything down. It asks listeners to stay, to listen actively. And then there's Blues and Ballads, released much later in 2016, but spiritually connected to this period of introspection. This album feels like Mehldau arriving in a place of deep calm. Here, he's a master of understatement. The trio plays with immense space, letting blues feeling and ballad tempo do the emotional heavy lifting. Nothing is overstated. The music breathes. This isn't about innovation or disruption, it's about depth. About what happens when an artist becomes completely at peace with his own voice. So taken together, these four albums tell us something essential about Brad Mehldau. They show an artist refusing the idea that jazz progress only moves forward in a straight line. Sometimes it moves sideways, sometimes inward, sometimes it pauses altogether. And in those spaces, the pauses, the silencers, the left turns, Mehldau finds extraordinary beauty. And you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography and best hits. Now it's time for some trendy music news. So New York jazz fans, if you're starting 2026 right, Smoke Jazz Club is where it's all happening. Hailed as the #1 jazz club in New York City, Smoke has just dropped a stacked January lineup. It all kicks off on January 7th with the club debut of Joshua Redman leading his incredible new quartet, straight up modern jazz royalty in the room. Then get ready because Brad Mehldau takes over January 14th to 18th, first in soul performances, then rolling deep with his piano trio featuring Alex Claffey and Marcus Gilmore. The month keeps heating up with Cyrus Chestnut's birthday celebration week, January 21st to 25th. Also a special Steinway piano solo concert streaming live around the world. And closing things out, a powerhouse trio with Nicholas Payton, Buster Williams, and Lenny White. New year, new earlier set times, and Friday night live streams as always. For tickets and the full schedule, check out smokejazz.com. January at Smoke is absolutely unmissable. And there was some trendy music news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Brad Mehldau's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about more of his best albums of all time. Here's a quick recap of what's coming up. And this is where Brad Mehldau goes big, because at a certain point improvisation alone isn't enough. The questions get larger, the forms get wider, and the music starts building worlds, not just tunes. So that shift starts with Highway Rider in 2010. Orchestra, voice, long-form themes, classical structure, even folk echoes all living together. This is the moment Mehldau stops sounding like just a pianist and starts sounding like a full-on storyteller. Then comes Ode in 2012, bringing that compositional focus back into the trio. Every tune is original, every form intentional, sharp edges, deep swing, proof that brain and groove can absolutely coexist. Same Reads the Constitution flips a tone in 2018, political, fragmented, confrontational. And Jacob's Ladder in 2022, jazz colliding head-on with prog rock intensity, dark, urgent, relentless. And there was some insight into what's coming up during this hour, and you're tuned into the Weekend Jazz Update with Ashanti Silva. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Ashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography and best hits. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. So we're going to be exploring a new chapter in the career of one of the most visionary jazz pianists of our time, Brad Mehldau, focusing on his work in the 2010s and early 2020s, a period where he decisively steps beyond improvisation alone into full-fledged composition. So this is the era when Mehldau stops simply playing tunes and begins shaping entire sonic worlds. At some point in every great artist's life, improvisation can only take you so far. The forms get bigger, the questions more complex, and the music demands a wider lens. For Mehldau, this point arrives in the 2010s. So we're going to be tracing the evolution through 4 key albums: Highway Rider from 2010, Ode from 2012, Same Reads the Constitution in 2018, and Jacob's Ladder in 2022. Each record shows a different facet of Mehldau's journey, a commitment to expanding jazz's narrative potential while remaining rooted in the essence of improvisation. So let's start with Highway Rider, released in 2010. This album marks the first unmistakable sign that Mehldau was ready to break the frame. Gone are the limits of trio improvisation, in comes orchestra, voice, and extended forms. Listening to this record is like watching a film unfold. Themes recur, evolve, and transform with cinematic precision. It's a rare hybrid of classical structure, American folk echoes, and jazz improvisation all coexisting naturally. What makes Highway Rider extraordinary is how it reframes Mehldau. He's no longer just the pianist we know from trio sessions, he's a storyteller, an architect of sound, creating spaces where the listener can move freely through time, mood, and emotion, reminding us that jazz isn't just about solo flights, it's about narrative, dialogue, and the interplay of ideas across soundscapes. 2 years later comes Ode, which brings that compositional ambition back into the trio setting. Every piece here is original, carefully structured but swinging with undeniable groove. This album shows Mehldau as a composer who understands that intellectual rigor and physical rhythm are not opposing forces, they coexist beautifully. For listeners, Ode demonstrates balance. The forms are sharper, the rhythms more angular, but the music never alienates. It's challenging without being cold, sophisticated without losing soul. The trio is cohesive, every note purposeful, every improvisational moment part of a large architectural vision. So this one's a record that rewards attention, where subtle shifts in harmony or phrasing reveal deeper layers of intention. In short, it's Mehldau at the height of his compositional discipline. Fast forward 2018 and we reach Same Reads the Constitution, an album that marks a tonal and thematic shift. Here, Mehldau is explicitly political and confrontational. The music is fragmented, dense, and at some times intentionally abrasive. Listeners may notice the music feels restless, the phrasing sharp, the structures disrupted. But within this seeming chaos is Mehldau's intelligence and intention. Every dissonant chord, every irregular rhythm is a deliberate choice, a statement about presence, awareness, and responsibility. So this album proves that jazz can challenge, question, and provoke while still drawing from the deep well of tradition. Finally, we arrive at Jacob's Ladder, released in 2022. If Seymour was challenging, Jacob's Ladder is urgent. Here, Mehldau collides jazz with the intensity of progressive rock. The textures are heavy, the moods are dark, and the momentum relentless. This is not fusion for decoration, it's fusion as force. Mehldau plays as if the music itself carries stakes. The listener feels the pressure, the tension, the release. Jacob's Ladder is a culmination of the decade-long arc we praised tonight. It synthesizes Mehldau's compositional ambition, his trio mastery, his willingness to engage with the world outside the studio. So this album asks listeners to step fully into the music to confront the emotional and sonic landscapes presented. So taken together, these 4 albums, Highway Rider, Ode, Same Reads the Constitution, and Jacob's Ladder, demonstrate a clear through line. Mehldau refuses to shrink his ambition. He refuses to confine himself to the expectations of a jazz pianist. Instead, he expands, experiments, engages, and challenges. And that was some insight into some of Brad Mehldau's best albums of all time. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Ashanti Silva. On this week's episode, it's about Brad Mehldau, his biography, and best hits. We've come to an end of this week's episode of the Jazz Update, so now it's time to recap what we discussed on today's show. Born in Florida in 1970, Mehldau grew up immersed in music, drawing inspiration from both the structural brilliance of Bach and Chopin and the improvisational mastery of jazz legends like Bill Evans, Keith Jarrett, and Herbie Hancock. That duality, rigorous composition paired with free-flowing improvisation, defined his style, introspective, expansive, deeply emotional, and technically masterful. Mehldau's career took off in the early 1990s in New York, quickly making waves with his lyrical touch and inventive phrasing. His debut, introducing Brad Mehldau in 1995, hinted at the brilliance to come. It was the Art of the Trio series, volumes 3 to 5, that truly cemented his place in jazz history. With bassist Larry Grenadier and drummer George Rossi, Mehldau transformed the piano trio into a laboratory of storytelling, harmonic exploration, and deep emotional resonance. Over the years, Mehldau has expanded his sound, experimenting with orchestration, electronics, and genre fusion. Let's talk about the 5 essential Brad Mehldau albums that trace his evolution. First up, Art of the Trio Volume 3 songs released in 1998. An intimate trio session where Mehldau navigates standards and contemporary songs with lyrical sensitivity and inventive interplay, establishing his early voice. Next up, Highway Rider in 2010. A cinematic tour de force, featuring orchestra, voice, and extended compositions, this album showcased Mehldau's ambition as a storyteller, blending jazz improvisation with classical and folk influences. In 2012, Ode returned to the trio format, balancing intellectual rigor with groove. Angular rhythms, sophisticated harmonies, and seamless swing make this one of Mehldau's most balanced statements. Same Reads the Constitution in 2018 marks a tonal shift, political and emotionally confrontational. Finally, Jacob's Ladder release in 2022 pushes into bold territory, merging jazz with progressive rock intensity. Dark, urgent, and relentless, this album demonstrates Mehldau's fearless drive to expand jazz's expressive possibilities. So taken together, these 5 recordings chart Mehldau's journey from introspective trio pianist to daring, boundary-pushing composer. His work continues to redefine what jazz piano can be, bridging tradition and experimentation, intellect and emotion. For anyone exploring modern jazz, Brad Mehldau remains essential listening, a master of melody, harmony, and narrative through music. And that was some insight into everything that we discussed on this week's episode of the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. And on that note, we've come to an end of this week's episode of the program. Don't forget, you can check out the archives of today's show on my YouTube channel, The Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan. So I'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.